So I've got just a couple of big takeaways, then we'll take a break and do a quiz. So big takeaway here, every internet IP address is being scanned and attacked continuously. That's the takeaway you've got to, if it's on the internet, it doesn't matter how recently you put it on the internet, the fact that it's a new IP address block, they're being scanned all the time. So botnets and the advanced persistent threats will try to use every vulnerability to gain control of the service. So if they can find a defect, whether or not it's recorded in the CVE database, but if they can find a defect, they're going to try to use that defect to gain control of the service. And so a lot of times those are just outright software bugs. So attackers can pivot inside the network from compromised devices to protected devices. So you can get into the network from, you can go from one of these devices like a web server that's supposed to be on the internet. And if you can find a vulnerability, you can go from there and launch attacks against other networks. And that's a really classic scenario that's actually used. And vulnerable software is still vulnerable even if you've configured it not to talk to strangers. So I saw a case today where somebody had a server, a database server, a Microsoft, I'm sorry, it was a MySQL server, is on the internet, and they had configured the MySQL so that it was only willing to allow logins from certain IPs. But if there's a defect in the MySQL software, that then you potentially could cause damage on that machine and get access to things you shouldn't have access to, even though MySQL has a good configuration on it. So the good configuration is only as good as the software is perfect. On NAT, big takeaways. So some NAT devices create backdoors allowing attackers to their private network. That's what the backdoor photo here is all about. So these backdoors allow connections to come back inbound from the public internet back to the devices without being able to, without meaning to. To protect the device using NAT to connect outbound to the internet, you need to know what kind of NAT you're using. So there's only certain kinds of NAT that are really appropriate. Encryption of all kinds, whether it's done through TLS, VPNs, SD-WAN, encryption is really there to defend against eavesdroppers, of which, you know, nation state actors are some of the main ones. Eavesdroppers who can monitor traffic as it flows through the network. So recently, for example, Zoom got a lot of heat because they were allowing traffic to flow through countries where there was no reason to have it flow through. So you might have been a Zoom user in Japan and found your Zoom call data was actually being transmitted to servers in China. Well, they said this was just a configuration mistake, but this is the sort of thing where folks are concerned about who actually has access to their data. And so that's why folks are concerned about the encryption that's present on Zoom calls and other kinds of meetings, and these days phone calls. They want to know that audio and video is being encrypted and protected. And the main eavesdroppers that are kind of active right now are nation states. Now, of course, if you're at a coffee shop and you're using Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi has no password, then potentially somebody else can sniff your traffic there as well. And so that's a case where other types of encryption like via VPN or TLS can be really important. Encryption can prevent attackers who would like to spoof data. So that's one of the other big benefits of encryption, is that it keeps folks from inserting and injecting data. So for example, in the voice unified communication space, Verizon for years has been using VPN tunnels to send their SIP signaling through. And one of the big advantages of that is it prevents folks on the general internet from spoofing Verizon or customer IP addresses and being able to generate calling traffic. You have to, in order to generate calling traffic in the Verizon business network, most of the network, you have to be able to send it through a VPN, which means you have to have authentication credentials or find some other kind of defect or vulnerability